More opportunities to put your questions to senior members of the government. Delighted to welcome on board today Mel Stride, who is Work and Pensions Secretary, who's in the studio with me. But actually, thank you for coming along, Secretary of State. Good to see you, sir. We're not actually going to start with a question. We're going to, in a way, start with an announcement, because you are able to tell us today, as part of the famous 5 pledges, how those perhaps on lower incomes are going to get a cash boost. Secretary of State.
Absolutely. So the announcement today, Nick, is that from today we are increasing the support that we're providing to those on universal credit who are receiving childcare. The support payments that we're going to be making to them will be increased up to a maximum of 47%. So a very significant move. And the second thing we're doing is one of the things that has prevented people from availing themselves of childcare has been the upfront payment that they've had to make. We're removing that problem by giving financial assistance there as well. So a very, very big boost to tens of thousands of families up and down the country.
You've anticipated one of my questions. Do we know roughly how many people we're speaking of? Approximately.
Well, yeah, there are 119,000 households who are already receiving this particular benefit, so help with their childcare. Obviously, that will potentially help them, but our expectation is there will be tens of thousands more families who will now feel that it's now worth going into the labour market, into work, as a consequence of these improvements.
And before we take the first question, how much is the package worth? Is there a global sum for how much this is worth?
It's several billion if you include the rollout of additional supply. So we're also working on making sure there's more on offer in local areas, as well as supporting those with the payments that are required.
Secretary of State, the first caller is about childcare. It's Jenny in Rickmansworth, and you're through to Mel Stride. Go ahead, Jenny, your question. Good morning.
Good morning, and good morning, Mr. Stride.
Good morning, Jenny.
Yeah, I've taken quite a lot of interest in this because I have very proudly become, 18 months ago, a great-grandmother.
Oh, congratulations.
Well done.
Thank you very much. And I did hear a programme about something very similar a couple of 2 or 3 months ago, and I looked into this, and I found out all I could from my granddaughter, that she's terribly busy doing a job and looking after a child, and fortunately sharing a home with her partner. Now,
can I possibly move you to the... I'm sorry if I'm a little bit brusque, but I've got so many people because it's such a rare opportunity. Could I move you straight to your question, Jenny, if I could?
Okay. My question is, what help will there be for people like my granddaughter who cannot actually afford the childcare? So I help her. But everybody hasn't got a grandma who can help out.
Okay.
And she isn't on universal credit. So will those people be included or get some more help than they get?
Can I get, just before I hand it over, can I get a rough idea of the sort of income that your granddaughter's making? Just broadly speaking, do you have an idea of a monthly income so Mr. Stride can assess it better?
Monthly. No, an annual income. I've never asked her, but I looked it up on the people she works for. So it's not a great salary, although she is a graduate, as is her partner.
Okay, what sort of number are we talking about, Jenny, if I can be so bold as to ask that? I mean, 20, 50?
In the 20s.
In the 20s. OK. Jenny, thank you. Mr. Stride.
OK, Nick, thank you. And Jenny, thank you so much for your question, and many congratulations on becoming a great-grandmother. Great news. Now, as you've mentioned, your granddaughter is not on universal credit, so wouldn't, therefore, the announcement we'll make today wouldn't apply to her. However, there is a free childcare offer for those who are in work. It's administered not by my department, but the Department for Education, and that is 30 hours per week for those who are in work at that time, and that offer is going to be expanded through time. It's currently for those with 3 to 4 year olds, but it will through time go right from 9 months old up to when children start primary school. So there are other offers out there over and above the one that's available within universal credit.
Jenny, my congratulations to you as well. Thank you for getting us started. Lauren is in Wellingborough. You're through to the Secretary of State. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hello. So my question for the Secretary of State today is, as I'm sure you know, being a single parent on universal credit means that you will lose any bonuses that you get from your work, whether it be through a cost of living payment or a bonus that you've achieved. You then lose it through your means-tested benefits. Just as Liz Truss lifted the cap on bankers' bonuses in London to attract bankers into London, are you able to lift the cap for people on universal credit so that they can keep, say, £1,000 of their bonus every year to attract people into work and incentivise people to work?
OK, Lawrence, so the way that universal credit works is that income, whether it's a bonus or earnings, is tapered, the benefits are tapered away through time at the rate of 55 pence in the pound. So the way the system works is that wherever your income is coming from, whether it's a bonus or earnings, etc., you are always better off receiving it and earning it than not earning it. So it's not the case that you've got a cliff edge where all of this money that you're referring to just disappears. It's tapered away through time. And that's the real strength of universal credit. It always means that work pays.
Lauren, thank you for that. Mr. Stride, while we're talking about things that pay, can I make you aware of a campaign launched today by Money Mail as part of the Daily Mail? And they point out that while the base rate, and I remind my listeners, you were Financial Secretary of the Treasury, you were Chair of the Treasury Select Committee. The Money Mail points out that at a base rate of 5%, the banks are paying people, Barclays 0.85, Santander 0.85, and on it goes, HSBC 1.35%. And the paper says they are robbing savers blind. That's true when you look at the figures, isn't it?
Well, I think there's certainly a question to be asked, Nick, about the speed at which banks pass on the benefits of these interest rates. No, I think, well, that's a way of saying there's definitely something to be looking at, Nick. There's definitely something to be looking at. And indeed it is something. And the Chancellor has had the banks in for some very serious conversations about this. The Financial Conduct Authority, as you will know, also oversees that sector and is looking at exactly those kind of issues. So it is something that's right up there on the Treasury's
They should be doing more.
Moment.
The banks are quicker,
I think the general feeling is that there is a question mark hanging over whether they are passing on these benefits to savers quickly enough. And what I'm reassuring your listeners of is that we are absolutely looking at that. But the one thing I would say is, of course, you can shop around. And it is not
a lot of shopping to be done.
Well, there are a lot of, well, to be fair, Nick, there are a lot of banks out there and there are a lot of opportunities to invest your money. You should always take advice when you do these kind of things. But people should shop around and the market should start to move rates in that way as well. But it is something that we're looking with the Chancellor and the Financial Conduct Authority very closely at.
A question mark, as you say. Stuart's in Southampton. Your question to Mel Stride. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, hi Mel.
Morning.
As somebody who's actually worked from home many moons ago, and also somebody who employs about 25 people, of which some actually do work from home, I can obviously see the advantages and disadvantages of both. You know, but the key thing for me is when I work from home, I did actually suffer from a mental perspective because I didn't have that social side of the business which people get. You know, Zoom meetings aren't the same as having a face-to-face, etc. So I suppose my question is, I see the benefit in people coming into work, but how can you incentivise people to come back into work is really my question.
Well, I think the main thing is certainly within, say, the civil service, for example, it would be down to ministers to address those issues within their own department. But once you're into the private sector, these are clearly issues between the employer and the employee to get that balance right. But I think the point that you make, Stuart, is absolutely right about the value of being in work and part of the community that is work, you know, whether it's having those catch-up conversations at the water cooler or it's having those essential sort of interactive meetings that really work best when you're face-to-face people, which drive productivity and success in those companies. But I think ultimately it's down to those that run companies to take those decisions in conjunction with their workforces.
Stuart, good luck with that. This was an area you addressed yesterday, Mr. Stride. Indeed, there was a story saying that there will be an expansion of schemes offering life coaches. What is a life coach? How does he function?
So I think the reference there would be to universal support. So this is getting people that have got health conditions back into work. And what we recognise is those people need extra support. They need the kind of one-to-one support to work out their training. Is this physical or
mental health, or both?
It could be both, absolutely both.
See.
And in fact, there's been, as you probably know, a rise in mental health conditions, particularly amongst younger people, actually phobias and anxieties and so on. Now, there are treatments out there. And what we're saying as a department is that we want to see work as being absolutely central to improving people's health conditions. If you can get health support plus people staying in work or getting into work, all the benefits that Stuart was referring to actually of going into an office every day, the routine, the camaraderie of being in work, then that can really move the dial. So my department is absolutely four square between getting health support plus work support deliver together to drive those outcomes.
A record 2.5 million people, you'll know this figure better than I, are not working because of long-term sickness. That's up 400,000 since the pandemic you just referenced, Secretary of State. And there's also social media-driven anxiety and the strain of working from home at uncomfortable desks and sitting in uncomfortable chairs. Does that mean some companies might be sued because they didn't give the person a nice chair, Mr. Stride?
Well, there are various regulations around work, and and most good employers, and I'm sure LBC and others adhere to those, so that's not an issue. But look, the broader issue of people not being well, you're absolutely right. There has been an increase in the long-term sick and disabled, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years. Now, there are many reasons for that. Some is simply the fact that the workforce has got bigger, so there are more people in the workforce. Some is that the workforce has got older, as we're an ageing society. We've also increased the state pension retirement age, which means we've got older people in the workforce, and they're more likely to have those kind of conditions. But we need to do something about those that have these conditions, and that's where, as I say, we're bringing support to get people into work alongside the medical intervention at the same time.
And lastly on this, what is the percentage of your staff who are behind their desks at the Department of Work and Pensions, Mr. Stride?
It's around 50% on any one day.
Are you happy with that?
No, I'm working to have that figure increased, and it has actually increased from where it was when I first joined the department.
Where was it when you first joined the department?
It was down at nearer 40%, I think, was the
your goal?
target. I don't know that I have an over the organisation goal, because we've got 90,000 people, and some people have to be in work, of course, every single day. Work coaches are there to have face-to-face meetings in job centres with clients. There are other areas where working from home works much more effectively, but I do want to see that number go up, and that's something that I know fellow ministers are also working on.
Ashley's in Beaconsfield with the next question to Mel Stride. Go ahead, Ashley. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Nick. Morning, Mr. Stride.
Good morning,
my
Ashley.
question is to yourself: is I'm struggling with my mortgage. How exactly do you expect me to hold my nerve?
This is, of course, reference. I imagine you're saying to Rishi Sunak, who appeared on the weekend, saying that we need to hold our nerve, or people should hold their nerve. Mel Stride.
Okay. So the problem here, Ashley, and I totally understand that for you, and I don't know your particular circumstances, but for many, many thousands of people across the country, increasing mortgage rates is of incredible concern. But the most important thing that we can do now is to get down inflation, and we're committed to halving that by the end of this year. And part of the way that happens, as you know, is that the Bank of England puts up interest rates, and that's known as tightening monetary policy, and that has a knock-on consequence for mortgages. Now, that's happening across countries right across the world. And in fact, mortgage rates in the United States, Australia, New Zealand and many other countries are right up there with the same kind of rates that we have. The Eurozone has the highest interest rates it's had in the last couple of decades. But all of this points towards really getting inflation down, because if we can squeeze inflation down, we'll start to see those rates softening.
Not going down, Mr. Stride.
And I was coming on to this,
Okay.
Nick, but that doesn't mean we don't do something right now. So the Chancellor has had the major mortgage lenders he has come to an arrangement called the Charter with those mortgage lenders, in which they will provide a number of new facilities for those in Ashley's situation. So that is the right, for example, to switch from a repayment mortgage to one that is interest only, perhaps to extend the term of a mortgage to lower the payments, and to do so in a way that doesn't damage your credit rating. And there are various other easements that are there as well. So I think the message really, Nick, to anyone who's at home worrying about their situation, their ability to repay the mortgage, is to speak to their lender and to talk about and explore exactly those kind of issues.
Which is a bit more proactive than just holding your nerve, isn't it, Secretary of State?
Well, I think, to be fair, I think my read of the Prime Minister's comment there was that the government needs to stick to the course. And I think he's absolutely right, because what we're about is we've got to get inflation. If we can get inflation half what it was at the beginning of this year, that will take pressure off mortgage holders. It'll take pressure off the public more generally. It'll see food price inflation coming down as well. And that's a really important prize, and we mustn't deviate from that. And I think that's what the Prime Minister was really saying.
But reminding my listeners, Financial Secretary of the Treasury, chaired the Treasury Select Committee, you are the financial guru in the room. 13 times in a row now the interest rate has gone up, and we haven't moved. Why is it going to work this time when it hasn't worked before?
Well, it is working in as much as headline inflation is coming down. It's stickier and it's more persistent than many had expected, but it is nonetheless coming down. I am confident, and if you look at most of the forecasts from the IMF and the Bank of England and the OBR and others, that come the end of this year, we will see inflation substantially reduced.
You know what my next question is going to be. What's substantial?
Well, we are committed to halving the level of inflation.
And we'll be there by year end?
My belief is that we will. Now,
Mel?
I know you call me Mystic Mel, which I take as a great compliment,
Indeed.
Nick, actually. It means
Indeed.
I'm far-sighted.
I worked with Meg. She was a great journalist.
She was a great journalist. OK. Nothing's certain in life, certainly not in economics. But I think we can be fairly confident that we're going to be down at that sort of level by the end of the year, which will make a huge difference, including to those who are holding mortgages.
All right. Lastly, on the subject of confidence, how much do you have in Andrew Bailey? Your colleague Jeremy Hunt said yesterday the Bank of England governor himself has been very open about the fact their inflation forecasting has not been accurate. They're conducting an independent review to see how they can do it better. Can do better is certainly words we could ascribe to Andrew Bailey and the Bank of England. Are they not, Mr. Stride?
Well, I have great sympathy with Andrew Bailey, and the reason is that when I was chair of the Treasury Select Committee for just over 3 years, in fact, Nick, I used to have him before my committee a lot, and I met him on a number of occasions and discussed inflation in great detail with him. The biggest challenge that the bank has had is uncertainty. They couldn't have foreseen the pandemic coming along. There were lots of uncertainties.
Could have moved a bit quicker when it did.
Well, I think history might judge, and perhaps it's not for me on your radio show to speculate on this, but history might judge that they could have moved a bit earlier. But let's see. I think the jury is a little bit out of that. But I think great uncertainty, the war that came along, the knock-on consequences for energy prices and so on, I think have been difficult. This point about the forecasting, though, is interesting, and it does seem to me that the bank itself is recognising that they do have something perhaps to answer for there, and that's why they're looking at it more closely.
Shall we go to Devon? Viv is in Morton Hampstead. Now, I don't know if that's central Devon, but I'm sure it is. Okay, and I make that point because, of course, that's the constituency that Mr. Stride is proud to represent.
Very
Viv,
much.
you're through to your local MP. Go ahead, Viv. Good morning.
Viv, good morning.
Thanks very much. Good morning. My husband and I are in our 60s. He was made redundant a year ago now. And since then, we've both been looking for work. But as you know, it's difficult in this area. There's not really a lot of work around. I have IT skills, quite good IT skills, but I'm having a lot of trouble finding any work that's near enough to get to, really.
What is your direct
question?
question?
Our savings in the meantime.
Can I move you, Viv, to your direct question of Mr. Stride, if I might, Viv, please?
Well, what help there is available for older people who live in rural areas like we do to find work.
And a word on your husband. Might I ask, you say he's been... What's his skill set, Viv? What did he do?
IT as well.
You're both IT. OK. Mr. Stride.
OK, well, Viv, good morning, and I'm so pleased to be speaking to one of my constituents. Look, the important thing is, the first point is that you and your husband have considerable skills, and you also have considerable experience of both life and of the workplace, and that is hugely valuable. So there are employers out there who will really value those particular things and will want to seriously look at employing you. The support that DWP gives will be through your local job centre. So I'm assuming that's probably Newton Abbot, given where you are. Within our job centres, we have what we call 50-plus champions. So these are people who specifically look at people like yourself and your husband to see what kind of skills upgrading you might need, what opportunities they are to get you into work. There are short little training courses that we're calling returnerships, where we take into account the skills and the experience that you already have. We brush those up to make sure that you're a good fit for the employers that are there locally. And the final thing I would point you to is on the internet, and that is to Google midlife MOT, and that is a whole suite of different tools looking at your current financial situation, issues around health that they may or may not be in your case, but also skills and job opportunities. So there are things there. But the final thing I would say, Viv, is I'm so pleased I am your Member of Parliament, which means that I will be very happy if you get in touch with my parliamentary office to look at your particular case and see whatever we can do also to assist you.
Viv, you're on the line. If you speak to my colleague now, we'll pass it on to one of the Secretary of State's team, and I'm sure he will act on it. Just on this subject, just expanding a little bit, having ruled out increasing the state pension age before the next general election, can you assure my listeners that they won't have to work until they're 70?
Well, the decision that I took a little while ago was around when the state pension age, retirement age, should rise to 68. So not 70, just 68. And I took the decision because of the uncertainty in the data at the moment. We could afford to wait until after the next general election and still give people 10 years or more notice of that change. So currently, when I was reviewing things, I wasn't looking at the rise to 70. But let me make a more general point, which is we are all living much longer.
Yes.
We are demographically an older and ageing society, supported by a narrower cohort of younger workers, and we have great pressure on the public finances. And if you add all those things together, it does push in the direction of working longer and later in life. So I leave you with that thought, but there's no immediate prospect. I can reassure your listeners, it's not going to happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen for some years, but at some point I think the direction is moving upwards in terms of retirement age.
Hassan's in Westminster. Your question, Hassan. Morning to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So we have massive labour shortages. Why don't we let the more than 130,000 asylum seekers work for a living like we do for the Ukrainian refugees? And that would mean that we don't have to spend £5 billion or something supporting them and locking them in barges or trying to deport them to Rwanda at £169,000 a pop.
Well, that is, of course, the number of people who are waiting for their cases to be processed. Some interesting figures, all of which I think I heard correctly, £6 million a day. Secretary of State.
Well, Hassan, good morning. Look, I think at the heart of this does lie the illegal immigration issue and the numbers that are coming to our country and not going through the appropriate channels. And for various reasons, we need to reverse that, not least, actually, the danger to those people making those perilous journeys across the short Dover Straits, some people dying in the process. We've got to stop that flow. The strategy to stop the flow is basically to make it less attractive for people to come here for the wrong reasons. And I think if we were to move to a situation where we said, well, if you come here and we're waiting to assess you and so on, and in the meantime you can work and so on and so forth, that would cut across that requirement to make us as a destination for those who are coming here for the wrong reasons less attractive. And I think that's a major consideration.
Just Hassan referencing Rwanda, is it value for money that we're spending somewhere in the region of £160,000 for everyone that we might successfully move over there?
I think if, as I hope, and let's look at what happened with Albania, where we got an arrangement where we can send people back to Albania if they've come here for the wrong reasons. We've seen a drop in the number of Albanians coming of well over 90%, Nick. So if we can replicate that through using the Rwanda policy, I think that will be money well spent.
£169,000
well, we're spending
Stride.
£6 million a day on hotel accommodation at the moment. And the projections are that by 2026, that will have risen to £32 million a day. That is unsustainable, and that's why we have to step in now and start to halt this flow that's going on. And yes, it costs money to do that, but it's vital that we do.
Putting your Department of Work and Pensions hat back on, can you address the situation with Thames Water? You'll, I'm sure, have seen the stories now. They've got a £14 billion debt. I read that they are scrambling to try and find a £1 billion bailout. And I also see that Sky News is reporting the government is drawing up contingency plans for the collapse of Thames Water. 7,000 jobs there, Secretary of State, and water supply to roughly a quarter of the population of this country. Mr. Stride.
So I can't come on a radio programme, unfortunately, Nick, and speculate as to exactly what's going on. I'm only reading really what you're reading in the papers at the moment. But let me just make some really important points. And the first one is that Ofwat has, as part of its remit, a requirement to look at the resilience of the entire sector, and will have been looking at and continue to look very closely at Thames Water. Government as well has contingency arrangements in place to cover any scenario which may play out. And what I'm supremely confident of is whatever the situation is at Thames Water, the water will continue to flow. So there's no question of that company going down in any form and causing that kind of problem.
The government will bail it out?
Well, I'm not going to speculate because we don't know exactly what the situation is, or at least I don't. And therefore, I'm not going to say what may or may not happen. But just to reassure your listeners,
are involved in the
the water will
conversations,
continue to
are
flow.
they?
Well, there will be numerous conversations going on between Ofwat and government and that company and the company and Ofwat, I've no doubt. But as I say, I can't speculate on exactly what's going on at the moment, and it is speculation in the papers. But I can reassure your listeners that contingency plans will be well advanced and are there through time generally for that sector.
Why has Thames Water failed?
Well, as I say, I don't want to get drawn into sort of commenting on the financial position of any particular company. I mean, it does seem to have quite large debts. I'm reading about 14 billion or thereabouts. But as I say, I can't really comment on that. It wouldn't be right for me, actually, as a member of the Cabinet staff, commenting on that.
OK, so privatisation failed here, though, didn't it?
Well, we could have a long debate about that, whether things, the counterfactual would have been better if we kept it in public service. I think the key, actually, is making sure that we have a resilient system that invests the right amount of money to make sure we have the sort of infrastructure to cover the kind of sewage issues that I know we're all concerned about, and also stands by consumers and doesn't charge too much for those services that we receive.
Moving towards the last few minutes together, let's get another caller in. Joe in Milton Keynes. Joe, your question to the Secretary of State. Go ahead. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. So I work in emergency services, and my question applies to colleagues within my specific job and those in the wider sphere of the public sector, having spoken to many day to day. The many individuals, due to the shambolic pay conditions for myself and many others, not even able to afford to pay into a pension pot due to the incredibly low starting pay and slow incremental progression, and potentially not even getting a pay award this year. So I'm just wondering, when's the Secretary of State expecting to have his job title changed from Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to just Secretary of State for Work?
Okay. Well, Joe, good morning. And firstly, can I thank you for all that you do in a very vital part of the public service. Look, the important thing here is that the government, and my department in particular, recognise that there are people on low pay who need particular support. And that's why, for example, we've had a number of interventions aimed at providing financial support to those on low pay. So this year, £900 to those 8 million low-income households up and down the country. We've just sent out a £150 payment to 6 million disabled people. Pensioners, you mentioned pensions, will receive £300 with their winter fuel payment in December. And that comes on top of actually putting benefits up, including universal credit by 10.1% in April, as well as pensions up by 10.1%. And of course, we put the national living wage, which is there to help lower earners, up by 9.7% in April, as well as doing things on energy bills through the energy price guarantee, where through a windfall tax on the energy companies, we actually halved the average energy bill over the last year. So we're doing whatever we can, particularly targeted at the most vulnerable. And I'm very proud, actually, of what my department has done to make all that happen.
All right, last couple of questions. I'll have to do them off email because we need to let you go. This comes from Guy in Winchester. The Prime Minister repeated his support for triple lock yesterday. Why are you so obsessed with this policy? Many who are actually in work need better pay or their mortgages, more help with their mortgages. The triple lock, why?
I think we do have a particular duty, Nick, to pensioners. They are in a position where it is less easy for them to step back into the labour market, for example, if they need to go, and as we heard from Viv in Morton Hampstead. So I do think it's particularly important that we look after them. And
will it be in the manifesto for the next general election?
I'm confident that it will be, but it's not for me to write the manifesto on air. But I think it almost certainly will be. Yeah.
And can I get a word from you on the latest industrial action we see looming in the health service? This is, as we know, the nurses. We're all celebrating the fact that they're going back to work, but now we read that consultants have got 2 strike dates earmarked for July. I remind my listeners, you'll be aware of this, starting salaries are nearly £90,000 and they go to around £130,000. Mel Stride.
Yeah, so the BMA looking for 35% across the board, including the junior doctors, is just not raising people's mortgage rates. Inflation impoverishes us all, and one of the ways we can control it is to make sure that wage increases don't get to be too high. Now, you mentioned those figures for these consultants, 128,000 opportunities to earn considerably more than that, I think, through extra duties and so on. Yeah. The Chancellor also made some changes to the pension arrangements, altering the tax treatment of pensions so that those with a £1 million plus pensions pot, which includes many consultants, are able to continue to work without any tax disadvantage. Those are big things that we've done. What we need now is we need the action to be called off so that we can get round the table and come to a sensible resolution. So deeply regrettable that we're seeing these continued strikes.
Thanks for coming along. Look forward to welcoming you again. Welcome Pensions Secretary Mel Stride appearing here on LBC. Coming up, Andrew, now Lord Lloyd Webber, his personal crusade to get more music into state schools and to get instruments into the hands of the pupils. It's 9:31 on LBC. The news is next.
The Work and Pensions Secretary has told Nick contingency plans will be well advanced for any failure of Thames Water. It's understood the firm, which has £14 billion of debt, is trying to shore up its finances. Hospital leaders say strikes by junior and senior doctors will lead to a full week